NSFW, Redditors who live in small secluded towns. What's a really ducked up dark NSFW thing that happened in your town that everybody knows about? I'm from a small town in central Utah. To my knowledge, there are at least 3 operating polygamist cults in and around that town. Some of which are known for marrying children and many other ducked up things. Suicide pacts have been acted out by children in retaliation to being raised such a way. And tons of creepy shit behind closed doors. Some of the plague houses are outfitted with carpeted walls to dampen any sounds that come from there. Tons of other extremely ducked up cults exist everywhere in Utah, Idaho and northern AZ. It is still rampant. Town in question is Manti, Utah if you're interested in looking into it. The judge was basically throwing all kids in juvie for pay. It was national news called Kids for Cash or Cash for Kids. Anyway, I went in front of this very judge when I was younger. He told me flat out the only reason I wasn't sent away was because I was signed up for the Marines. He told me you got 6 months till you graduate, don't make trouble in my town ever again. To give you a sense of how corrupt he was, I only got caught driving 15 minutes after curfew. There was a girl in my town who was paralyzed in a car accident, from which she was able to sue and receive a large settlement. She hired a guy to manage the funds for her who embezzled the money. She found out, so he left a parcel bomb on her doorstep disguised as a Christmas present, which he opened and it killed her instantly. She was a single mom as well, and I can't even imagine what her daughter has gone through. 10 years ago, a woman called 911 from the JC Penney parking lot, claiming to had just given birth. She had a baby in her backseat and the umbilical cord and everything. Took her to the hospital and it was obvious she had not just given birth. They found the real mother of the baby, dead, on a popular walking trail at a park in town. The woman had cut the baby out of the other's stomach and tried to pass it off as her own. As far as I know, the baby survived. I grew up in a small town of about 2,000. It was a very conservative, redneck logging town. There was a girl in high school who was known as the school slut. She was a grade ahead of me. She never seemed to actually date anyone, yet everyone talked about how slutty and easy she was. I didn't find out until several years later that her dad had been arrested for molesting her and her younger sister. She didn't want to be known as the girl who got molested, so to cover the story she spread rumors about herself being slutty. I know how much people talked about her behind her back, and I'm sure she knew it as well. It breaks my heart to know that she thought that was better than what she would get if they knew the truth. Small East Coast town. My mom broke up with her serious boyfriend and moved us kids to grandma's house. Less than a week later, the boyfriend had a co-worker over to look at buying his stereo as he was trying to get his life in order and win my mom back. The co-worker was secretly gay, hit on the boyfriend, and when the boyfriend politely declined, the co-worker grabbed a maglite and beat him to death. Apparently he didn't want his secret getting out at work. I was maybe 6 and didn't find out what happened to him until I was 12, and a friend of the family slipped up and mentioned him being murdered while I was in earshot. In the 1980s, a group of friends who liked to get high in the woods killed one of their own after he had stolen some of his PCP. 36 stab wounds, eyes and chest ducked up. The dude said that Satan had murdered the dude, not him. 2.5 weeks later, the kid was arrested. He hung himself in his cell 2 days later. If you want more info, Google Ricky Casso. A kindergarten teacher would lock students in what she called the monster closet if they misbehaved. The closet had no light but had a speaker that the teacher would play noises on and would occasionally bang on the door. There was supposedly a picture of a monster in the closet, with that picture was never recovered. The story only really broke out after a kid pissed themselves in the closet and broke their nose bashing their head against the door trying to get it open. The only issue is that the teacher was told about the investigation weeks before it was actually conducted, so there was no physical evidence, just witness statements from kindergarten age kids. Another story is from middle school. A popular girl got pregnant and everyone assumed it was her boyfriend. Nothing too major there, but whatever. People bullied the boyfriend, saying that he ruined her life and other awful things. He was kicked off the football team and everything. A year later he kills himself and the girl comes out and says that the baby wasn't his but was actually her grandpa's, and that he is in jail right now, but she is deciding to keep the baby. They painted the pink church green in 2005. But if I'm giving you directions, I'm still telling you to turn left at the pink church. Lady killed a few guys on her farm and fed them to her pigs. They figured it out because she was still using their food stamp cards after they had been reported missing. She tried to petition the court to donate the pig meat to the local community center after the cops dissected them for evidence. Judge denied the request. Of course. Fun times. A 6-year-old boy who lived in a farm on the edge of town and hung himself when he tried to climb over a fence with a toy guitar strapped across his chest, and the guitar strap got caught on a fence post and strangled him. Popular siblings. He was a basketball player and she was a cheerleader. They were driving home together from an away game when he decided to race another car. On a busy highway at night, he lost control and drove under the trailer of a semi that had pulled out. The trucker didn't realize the car was traveling over 90 miles per hour. Both kids were beheaded in the accident. Right before Christmas, last summer, a 19-year-old took his friend up in his dad's plane and crashed in a field. They weren't found for hours after the crash and both were dead. He had coke and alcohol in his system and was just a student pilot. The dad had lost his wife in a freak accident on their property 9 months prior. Then his only son died. His house is for sale and he left the area. We live in a village with under 2,000 people. But a lot happens here. A newborn corpse was found in an abandoned van on the teen mom's property. People's firearms go off accidentally a lot. One guy cleaning his gun shot himself in the leg, and another, out for a morning stroll with his wife, dropped his gun and discharged, shooting her in the leg. My husband is a paramedic and there's never a dull moment here. I once listened to someone get murdered right outside my window when I was 11 and living in a small town in New Hampshire. Lots of screaming and banging. Then silence. I didn't know what to do. I was so young. Police were all over the place the next morning. Not a good time. I grew up in a washed up industrial and mining town in Pennsylvania. Real dreary place. As I grew up, I noticed that my mother had seemed wary of the priests at our church. Like wouldn't let me or my siblings get too friendly. Turns out that the big report on sex abuse in the Catholic Church in PA featured a good few priests and bishops from my area, including the bishop who covered a lot of it up. Timlin is his name, and he basically shuffled the offenders around so people wouldn't take action. I was too young to really notice much, but in that particular case it was clear that a lot of people knew something was up. 2 of the former state senators' kids who I went to school with used to have sex with their older sister. They bragged about it at school over a span of several years from about the 3rd grade until we were in high school. I went back to the high school during my junior year of college to visit a favorite teacher, and I saw one of my classmates at the junior high next door who was there to flirt with his girlfriend who was in the 8th grade. He did this in full view of the class teacher. He was at least 21 years old at the time. This was the late 90s, and that's one of 100 reasons why people move out of the deep south and never want to come back. These answers are almost unbelievably horrible. Can't quite remember how many years ago this was, but there is a story of a woman who would swing on a swing in her backyard holding her baby while singing very loudly. I'm guessing loudly enough for the neighbors to hear. The weird thing about it was she would do it very late at night. One night a neighbor called the police due to a noise complaint, and when the police arrived the police noticed the baby she was swinging with was dead. The baby had died and caused such mental trauma to the mother. She thought her baby was still alive, or couldn't bear to come to terms with their death. A guy was arrested after holding someone against their will in an abandoned residence and raping them. Cops finally showed up when she silently got out of the bed he forced her to sleep in with him and called police quietly while he was asleep. Across the room from her. Once he was caught, he confessed to and was prosecuted for a number of other rapes and murders around the area and through several nearby counties. He tortured women he captured for several days with homemade sex devices made from tree branches with condoms wrapped around them before murdering them and dumping the bodies in secluded locations. He received the penalty of death in the county he was tried in and will be entering his next trial in the adjoining county. They don't know how many people he's killed. He doesn't remember where a lot of the remains are. Some of his victims were misidentified as being overdose victims because of their known drug habits. The families had made their peace with knowing their loved ones died from drugs. But this is a new, fresh wound. I can only imagine how painful that must be. In 1996, 2 teens were arrested for the double murder of their parents. They were at the time 14 and 17 I think. They bragged about how they could kill their parents to their friends and how they wanted them dead, but obviously no one thought they were serious. They thought their parents were too strict and didn't let them have fun. The older brother shot his parents while the younger one helped him bring the bodies to the attic. They went to school and acted normally and no one suspected anything. They even had a party at their house a few days after the murder. Once the parents didn't show up for their jobs for a few days, there was a welfare check and things didn't add up. From what I remember, the older brother got a longer, harsher sentence and the younger one was let off easier because he wasn't the leader and just listened to what his brother told him to do. The younger brother was let out last year and works in a laundromat in a town half an hour away, and the older brother is trying to get his sentence shortened. A few years ago when my parents were house hunting, our realtor told us about a fixer-upper that was $100,000 less than all of the houses in the neighborhood. When my parents asked why, he disclosed to us that was the house that the boys lived in, and my parents refused to look at it. A family lives there and it's the only house on the block with a horrible lawn, chipped paint, and trash all in the yard. There's signs everywhere saying no trespassing and no pictures. The brothers were the Dingmans from Rochester, NH, if anyone wants to read up on them. Girl in my small, northern Utah hometown was murdered by someone she met online. One night, she just disappeared. Police searched for 6 months, eventually finding her remains buried among several different trenches at this dude's workplace. Guy got life without parole. Really rocked the town. Nothing like this had ever happened before. I was 10 at the time. A 14-year-old boy went missing a couple years ago, and then last summer his dad was arrested for his murder. I guess the kid confronted his dad over some scat porn he had found on the dad's computer, then the dad panicked and murdered him. Long story short, I got jumped by 3 dudes. One was a doctor's son. One was a pharmacy tech. One played basketball for a Christian league in France whenever he's not in town. They beat me with a metal chair into unconsciousness and beyond. I sustained around $6K worth of injuries, mostly around my face and head. Had to miss work for a while. Anyway, cops got called and actually stopped the car these dudes were in while they were covered in my blood and reeked of booze. But evidently the cops knew the guys, and according to reliable witness testimony, they just laughed about something and let them drive off. I tried to press charges against all these guys as my town is very small and everyone knew who they were. But being a small town, all the lawyers refused to represent me, claiming conflict of interest, thereby rendering these guys pretty much untouchable. I did end up going to court with them over it, but as I couldn't procure representation, I had to go through a mediator and nothing happened to these dudes at all. My hometown is pretty small and in the middle of a cornfield. It's also right alongside the interstate, so it's fairly commonly traveled for people going between big cities. But the town is small, and everyone knows everyone's story. There seems to be one dramatic, tragic vehicular accident every year, typically involving school kids. One year there were multiple fatalities in a crash on the interstate at our exit, and the crash made national news as a bus was involved. We also made national news for having a testicle-eating fish, pacu, in our lake. Narayosu's copyright airing. Growing up in a small town, I used to always love seeing the mystery van. Some guy painted his van to be an exact replica of the one from Scooby-Doo. Spotting it was always a highlight, but then years later it was in the news because apparently the guy was a child predator. The van was a gimmick to lure children. I was about 14 when I found about it, and I just remembered thinking that my small town was tainted. A kid and his friend were robbing his grandmother's house and she caught him and he put an axe in her head and stole her car. He dropped the car off at a local bowling alley with all of the valuables showing in the car, hoping that someone else would steal the car. Not really secluded, but everyone in the area knows this story. A town over from mine, 2 young boys killed a girl for her bike and threw her in a neighbor's garbage can. The parents searched for her for 2 days thinking she was alive before one of the boys came clean or someone found her in the can. I can't remember which it was. She was only about 11 or 12 at the time and it was really heartbreaking. When I was a kid, the town drunk was best friends with the town's most connected lawyer. He got him off the hook so many times that I'm pretty sure the cops stopped bothering to arrest him for driving drunk. I'm amazed he never killed anyone. So I lived in a small town in North Carolina for a little while, and there was a state senator who lived there, and it was well known he liked underage boys. Link. He was a powerful state senator who is incredibly shady. He also shot 2 intruders at his house. Link to story. There have also been suspicious fires set to people's homes who have accused him. He is not in jail. He is still rich and living a good life. He is like a character out of a John Grisham novel, except he will win and get to do what he wants for the rest of his life. The powerful always prey upon the weak, and they normally win. Small suburb outside of Chicago. Assistant principal of the middle school I attended was busted bringing students into his office and forcing them to perform oral sex on him. I was in high school when this all came out, about 15 years ago or so, and everyone who attended my middle school was totally disgusted. From what I remember from the story, the student who exposed him didn't think anyone would believe him. So he brought a recorder in his pocket and recorded the ass principal forcing the boy to perform oral sex on him in his office. Like, he would pull these boys out of class and call them down to his office during the school day. He is still on the sex predator list in our area, and deservedly so. There was this creepy looking house with an overgrown garden and dirty windows a couple blocks from our school. Our school bus would drive by it every day, and we would come up with stories about who lived there. One day it burned down. We found out it was an older couple with a retarded daughter. Apparently they kept her chained up in her room and she died in the fire. It may or may not have been an accident. It's a parking lot now with a small memorial for her. I live in a small town, around 500 people, and there was a really ducked up cult murder thing that happened a long time ago on the main bridge that goes into the town. Lots of hostages and it. If anyone wants to know more, just ask. I've got family around here that knows about it. Take your pick. 4,400 pop. Guy gets beat to death over $200 and a hoodie. Police officer rapes preteen girl and gets away with it. A husband and wife pimp out their 2 daughters. Get tried. Convicted. Serve some time. And the girls continue to live with the parents for several years. Older one still does. Younger one died from complications from diabetes at 26. Husband recently passed too. Several arson attacks destroy 3 houses in a week. Multiple teachers physically and sexually abuse students and nothing happens. Also, in a neighboring town, Pop 7000, there are not 1, but 2 serial, unrelated horse rapists. Small farm town. 3 brothers went missing. Father said he sent them somewhere to protect them from their mother. Tried to hang himself. Failed and went to jail. I lived near a relative of his. They thought he might have hid the bodies in the woods nearby. I had a rescue team search my pond. It's been several years and still no sign of them. 1. A guy threw boiling oil on his wife because he thought she was possessed by the devil because she talked back to him. 2. Another guy chopped his wife's arm off with an axe and she walked around with a fake one made out of pantyhose for years before she died. Mid-northern Mississippi. 19-year-old kid was living away from home with this drugged up old guy. Kid stole the guy's truck and planted an axe in his face after a horrible disagreement. I live in a suburb of the Toronto area. For a very long time we were basically the dumping ground for the bodies that the mob needed to dispose of, like burning cars with bodies and a trunk disposal. We also had a car dealership that had been in business for decades tank out suddenly. Turned out the owner met with a lady trying to buy a car and he exposed himself to her in his office. His defense was that he had gone to the bathroom earlier and forgot to put it away. Aside from that, not too much. A former classmate of mine was murdered by her father, along with her mother and sisters. Apparently they had been evicted from the house, and the dad decided to kill them one by one as they came home from school work. All of the girls went to an extremely expensive private school, but image was everything to him, and he lost his marbles. Lived in one growing up, until uni. There were a disturbing number of Kirby's no one mentions. High school teacher and longtime football coach got caught banging a student. He was forced to resign. He became the head of the State Football Coaches Association. When he retired, they named the football field and the adjacent street for him. He was recently inducted into the School Hall of Fame. A while back a little girl has just finished school and was walking home and was taken by a van man. Luckily a parent was watching a girl and noticed fat when she walked past the van. Her feet disappeared and she never came out the other side, so she noted the registration plate and immediately called the police. The local policeman who responded was just about to finish his shift, but as this was a priority and he was the closest officer, he followed the van. The policeman continues to follow the van for about an hour or so until he had back up, and eventually they managed to pull the van over. As the man was being arrested, the police officer opened the back doors and unhooded the girl, and it turned out to be his daughter. Earlier this year, a 60-year-old couple found dead in their apartment. The husband had killed his wife and then put her outside in the snow under a tarpaulin. No one knows when he killed himself. Another one happened in 2008 where a 88-year-old man shot his 2 disabled daughters with a revolver at his home. After that he went to the local hospital where his wife was being taken care of and shot her too. After returning home he killed himself with a sawed-off shotgun. The whole thing was planned from the start. He had left a note for his 3 other children. Edit. The reason the 88-year-old man killed half of his family was because he had enough of taking care of them. He was old. His 50-year-old disabled daughters couldn't be left alone for even a minute. He took care of them only on the weekend, and his wife wasn't there to help because she got sick. Young kid driving home gets hit by middle-aged man in new sports car. Kid is killed. Man who caused it is extremely upset about his car. Car's black box clearly shows man lost control on the bend due to very excessive speed. In court, man successfully argues that the black box data cannot be used as evidence as it has never been used in court before, so there is no proof of its accuracy. He gets let off with a slap on the wrist. Ironically, kid was in law school. Not sure how he would have felt about that. The entire town killed and burnt down the home of every Chinese person back in the day. As a way of apologizing, they annually find the whitest girl in town and make her the queen of the Feast of Lanterns, which is what they claim is a Chinese tradition. Apparently this isn't even Chinese in the slightest. It was a marketing scheme by a ceramic company. Local grocery store years ago had a high schooler working at it, as many do, but he was murdered and run through the store's meat grinder. Whoever did it was never caught and the store closed. Not a small town, but an island. Multiple young men, aged 15-35, have gone missing over the last decade. I believe only one body has ever been found. Recently one guy, on his way to work nearby, stopped to pick up a hitchhiker and went missing for 2 days. Was thankfully found alive, but in a community a few hours north after being drugged and held hostage. Details are hazy because the police aren't talking. One guy went missing during a hunting trip. His truck was found with blood inside it. In another case, teenager went missing after leaving a friend's house to go to work. Speculation is there's one or more serial killers targeting young men. We are not too far off from where the Picton Pig Farms murders happened, and chatter is he didn't work alone, but was the only person caught and charged. When I was in middle school, probably 8th grade, a male social studies teacher suddenly disappeared and none of the administration would tell the students why. Then they began pulling girls out of class for investigations. Pretty much an female student who had been known to be close and get along well with him. Turns out one of his 6th grade students, that means she was ducking 11 years old, had been molested by him for a few weeks but had been too scared to tell anyone. He was only caught when the girl's father opened her phone and saw explicit photos the teacher had sent her. He was arrested and given something 15 years in prison. The worst part, though, is that he was a single father of a girl. He had divorced his wife and gotten full custody of their 8-year-old daughter. Students who lived in the neighborhood said that he was pretty bad to her, not letting her out of the house and stopping her from having playdates. A few kids who worked as mentors at her elementary school said she was very nervous and shy. The general consensus among the town is that he was most likely molesting his daughter, but he was never investigated for that and the daughter was sent away to live with a relative. The teacher is probably one of the few black men in a rural Kentucky prison, and he's in there for child molestation, so I can't imagine he's having a very good time there. My hometown had a starvation cleansed sanitarium. There were around 40 deaths where people dropped down to 70 pounds. Crazy thing was that this was the 2nd time she opened her care center. Someone paid an illegal immigrant, only relevant because it caused him not to be able to make a lot of money, $300 to shoot and kill someone else in cold blood. Only the man who shoot the guy was arrested, not the guy who paid him to do it. BTW. Obviously not defending the shooter. He was an adult who knew better. But if you're going to take a chance like that for only $300, then you're either really stupid or really hard up for cash. A young boy went missing a few years back in the smallish town in California where I live, and it made headlines in local news because his mom claimed he was special needs. The entire town went looking for him. Massive search parties were held and everyone was on alert. A few days after he went missing, his father, who lived out of state, and teachers came out to say he wasn't disabled and that his mom was lying. A bunch of other weird details came out. The mom used the money people donated to buy new phones. They held a bonfire the first night he was gone while the town was out looking for him, etc. And a few days later they found his body in their backyard. Not 100 yards from where the search parties gathered. His older brother was arrested for killing him. But I still don't believe his mom didn't have something to do with it. An old man who worked at the local gas station car wash was held up at knife point, forced to drive out to a remote location and stabbed to death. After dumping his body, the murderer drove back to the car wash and cleaned himself up with the washers before driving off in the truck. The police found the old man about 2 miles from my house, and he would have had to drive by my house to get there. That old guy was the nicest person at that store. Spooky it. My wife is from Bath, Michigan. It is a small rural town that in the 1920s-30s had the school blown up with dynamite purchased at the local hardware store by a very mentally ill person. It still boasts one of the highest casualty numbers of any school attack ever in the USA. The details can be found in a book entitled Mayday. A guy murdered his wife and tried to dispose of her by using a blender so she would be easier to sneak out. It didn't work. So he repackaged the blender and returned it to the store he bought it from. They opened it to check on the condition of the product and found blood and hair and other bits in it. I haven't thought about this in a while, and if I recall correctly, he tried to get their kids to unwittingly help bury her in their basement. She was known as an all-around pleasant woman. We had a teacher who years ago made a homemade video of herself getting really familiar with a bottle of Jack. The video accidentally got mixed in with the rentals from our local library. Needless to say, decades later everyone in the town still remembers it, even the kids. I feel like if anyone from my town reads this, they will know. It's not a small town, but it's a college town in the middle of nowhere. A local journalist was killed close to 20 years ago and a lawyer bullied 2 teens into giving false confessions. One managed to get off a few years back after years of appeals, but the second is still in jail and probably will be for a long time. It's disgusting. About 5 years ago, the youth in my hometown had a real problem with heroin. One day towards the beginning of the school year, 2 high schoolers were partaking in a drug deal that went violent. I don't remember if it was the dealer or the buyer, but one killed the other one with a bat in the parking lot behind the school. My hometown where I grew up in. Very small town in Michigan within a little subdivision a little into the woods, where nothing ever happens. A daughter and her boyfriend murdered her father, who was a little special needs, with an ice pick and buried him in their backyard. This house was 2 houses down from mine. Young couple with 2 young children. The boyfriend reports the wife missing 4 weeks and begs her to come home. Appears on the news crying, asking why she would leave her kids. Turns out he had killed her, cut her up and spread the pieces around our town. They never found the poor girl's head or hands. It was so shocking how he managed to keep up the act of the poor husband who loves his family. A while ago, like over 10 years, a male teacher molested an 8th grade male student several times. It didn't come to light until 2013 when a photo made its way to the police. The most ducked up part though is that a majority of teachers in the district wrote letters to the judge asking for leniency. Despite this, the judge threw the book at him. But then the teachers wrote to the school board asking for them to give the teacher his pension. They denied but kept the teachers on staff. Enrollment dropped from over 2,000 to 89 that year, and a lot of people still homeschool. My hometown has a little less than 2,000 residents. Back in 2003 there was an older couple, maybe early to mid 50s, murdered in their bed. The man's son from a previous marriage had broken in one night and shot both of them with a shotgun. using a type of homemade silencer. I believe his motive was finance related. Something like he couldn't afford rent, so he killed them in hopes he could inherit the land and house. The most ducked up thing, that the couple's great grandson was staying with them that night, and he was the one who found their bodies. He ran to school in the morning in his pajamas with blood all over him, telling his teachers that his grandparents were melting. There's an episode of Forensic Files on the murders, but I can't recall the season. You can look up Jack and Linda Myers if you want to know more. My town is in the center of a parish, so a lot of villagers around it go to the school here. In any case, there was a principal of one of the primary school, 5-12-year-olds, who was always an upstanding man of the community, and he and his family were widely known and respected by the community. One day, the wife's mother came to check up on the man, and there was no answer at the front door. She went in the back. She found the wife brutally murdered on the couch. I can't remember the specifics of it all, I know it was horrific. She went upstairs to find the children dead in their beds, killed the same way. She went into the upstairs bathroom and found that the husband had killed himself. Turns out, the husband was struggling with a mental illness for quite a while and finally snapped, killing his family and then himself.